Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. A little bit of a different video today. So something that I've long been interested in is DIY gear building. I've always wanted to really dive in, learn how to build my own gear, and see what the DIY side of owning a home recording studio has to offer. But it's also been one of those things that's always gotten pushed to the back burner. I've always had a reason to not fully dive in and figure it out. Then, fortuitously, at NAMM this year, I met Mitch, who runs the DIY recording studio. Mitch is an absolute wealth of knowledge on all things gear building, DIY, and just music production in general, honestly. So Mitch and I hopped on a Zoom call and we had a great conversation about where to start if you're a beginner gear builder like me. Hopefully this is going to be the first in a series of videos documenting my journey with gear building, but there's no better place to start than getting a great foundation of knowledge from the man himself, Mitch of the DIY recording studio. Oh, and by the way, is it pronounced soldering or soldering? Sound off in the comments below. All right, let's welcome Mitch from the DIY recording studio live all the way from Australia. He's on the channel today. Mitch, what's up, man? Great to see you. Tell the people a little bit about yourself and about your channel if they don't already know. It's amazing. I love your content. So let us know what you got going on.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris, man. It's awesome to have met you and other people while I was overseas in America and stuff. And it's a bit crazy coming from Australia and being able to meet everyone from overseas. But yeah, my channel is the DIY recording studio. I'm very much just involved in all DIY studio solutions. So building acoustic treatment, building cables, building and modding guitars. And then more recently, I've gotten into building preamps and EQs and compressors as well. And I'm all about trying to show people how they can DIY themselves when it comes to home studios, because we're all in home studios now. And I think especially post COVID and all that sort of stuff, the idea of being in a home studio, the mentality of that has completely changed. Pre-COVID, it was still oh, you're in a home studio, and now it's just everyone's in a home studio.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, and so it's really important to know what we can really do ourselves, and we're all on tight budgets and stuff too. Being in a home studio and working with artists these days, we're working with less and less money in the budget to work with bands or artists or ourselves, and the DIY options can sometimes end up being way more affordable and net you better quality equipment than you would be able to afford otherwise. So it's a journey I've been on for many years, and it's something that I'm trying to help people navigate as well.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And it's definitely something that really interests me. So Mitch and I met at NAMM this past year. And we got to talking about this whole DIY philosophy and building gear and what all goes into that. And it's been something that I've been super interested in for my whole career, but I've never really dove into full on. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn from an expert and kind of figure out what the best entry points are into this world. I mean, it just seems to me, as kind of an outsider looking in on the DIY stuff, it seems kind of overwhelming, honestly. It seems like there's so many options. There's so much to learn and know that I don't exactly know where to start. So that's kind of what I want to learn from you, Mitch, is where to start, what's the best place to get going. And I guess I'll give you just a quick background on the little bit of kind of DIY gear work that I've done in the past. It's been a long time ago, but okay, so I was a studio intern, 10 years ago now. 12 years ago now. Oh my gosh. So as an intern, we had to fix cables and do a little bit of that kind of maintenance around the studio type stuff. So I did learn how to solder, how to use a soldering iron, and just really basic, cut the end off a mic lead and put it back on type of stuff. And then after I was an intern, I was an assistant engineer for a couple years. And through that, I did a little bit of work for my boss. I built like one really simple pedal that was basically amounted to like an on-off switch for a subwoofer. And then I repaired a couple guitars for him. So I put in some new pickups in a bass and put in some new pickups in a guitar. And then I think actually the guitar I ended up taking to my guitar tech and showing it to him. And he looked at my soldering work and was like, "You tried. You did a good try. I'm going to fix it for you, but at least you tried your best." So I feel like, and like I said, that was like 12 years ago, 10 years ago. So I'm kind of feel like I'm starting from bare bones here. So tell me what you think like the best first step would be for someone who's looking to get into this but doesn't have a lot of experience.
Yeah, cool. So definitely cables. Like if you've got a small home studio space and maybe you need some extra instrument leads or patch cables for your guitar pedals or equipment or some extra mic leads, that's a really safe, easy place to learn soldering for the first time because the components and the parts are extremely cheap. If you make a mistake, you can just snip the cable and go again. And we always need more mic cables. Like I've got so many mic cables in this studio and I need more. The other day I was talking to my intern and I was like, man, I got to sit down and get a day just to do more cabling. Like, because you run out. So that's a good place to start. You mentioned modding guitars. Guitar modding is actually that's probably what I would consider the next step, like swapping out the pickups of a guitar. That can seem a bit more daunting, but if you can make a working neat XLR cable or instrument lead, you can definitely mod a guitar. And that nets such a like guitar pickups, like proper Fender Telecaster pickups, like that Telecaster I've got on the wall there. That is just a Squire, like one of their cheaper model tellies, but it's got like proper custom Telecaster pickups in it. And I don't know if you saw, there was a video that came out maybe a year or two ago from a guy, Jeff Lim, who took all the guitar parts away from a guitar to see what gives the guitar its tone. And he basically demonstrated that it was really just the pickups that make the tone of when we're talking electric guitars here. It's pretty much like 99% down to the pickups, if not 99 point something. Like it's so much to do with the pickups more than anything else. So if you want to get, everyone has a cheap guitar. Everyone has a cheap first guitar they ever got. I would definitely recommend someone work on upgrading the pickups in their guitar, especially if they're a guitarist or need a better quality guitar. The next thing I would suggest for people to DIY is either a guitar pedal or potentially a microphone. And a microphone seems like a very crazy thing to go. Yeah. Like one of the first big projects I ever did was a microphone from Mic Parts. So how I really got into the DIY side of things was this is a bit of a story if you don't mind me going into it.
Please tell us.
Yeah. So I was actually at university. I went back as a 30-year-old adult to study again and do a degree majoring. I'd already done studies in live audio and was a live engineer for a long time. And I went back to study the studio side of things and get a degree and all that kind of stuff. And one of the units we had was audio technology, and we had to do a project building a microphone. And they basically wanted you to just get some cheap components and build like a dodgy microphone with like a simple circuit and like just with a few dollars worth of components. And it didn't have to sound great or anything like that. And I'd soldered for years and stuff. And I was like, but when I say soldered for years, I mean just cables and stuff like that, like nothing significant, never worked on a PCB or anything like that. And I did some research into what I could potentially build that was maybe a bit more of a challenge. Because I was like, if I'm going to build a microphone, I want to do something pretty significant. Like, and I was starting to look into all these options in DIY, and I came across Mic Parts. Matt McGlynn, are you familiar with micparts.com?
No, I've never heard of it.
Oh, okay, so are you familiar with Roswell microphones?
Yes.
Okay, so the owner of Roswell Mikes also owns this other company. He was at NAM,
Uh,
and it's called MikeParts.com. It's been around forever, and he does clones of famous mic circuits, or he doesn't even like to call them clones because he's taken the sonic characteristics of those microphones and then, potentially even made them better in some regards. And so he supplies these mic kits where all the parts get shipped to you and then you build them from the kit. And the circuits are pretty small. There's not a lot of components. And whilst it might seem pretty daunting, it's a pretty easy thing to build for you for like a first. If you're going to go to circuit boards, like start building circuit boards instead of just basic like cable building, that's a really good place to start. And we all need, once again, like we all need a really good microphone
yeah, of
in our
course.
studio. And for me, like I was at uni and I was using like C414s and Neumann U87s. And I was like, man, I'm never going to be able to afford this, especially right now because I'm a student, I'm poor. And so we had this project. At the time, the Aussie dollar was pretty good against the US dollar. So it only cost me like a few $100s to buy one of these kits. And I opted for a C414 clone. Um, and yeah, and so like it's his version of like a C414. And I built that microphone. It worked. And I was like, if yes, that was a huge win. And then we shot it out against real C414s in my class, and it stood up. And to the
Really?
point where people couldn't really tell the difference. Now, the microphone itself is a workhorse that gets used all the time in my studio. Now, I
Still,
still have
still
it.
to this day.
Yeah, I actually bought a second one to have a pair for overheads and stuff. So,
Sick.
and that's how I started my journey in DIY. Was I went down the microphone route, built some ribbon mics from a company called Bumblebee Pro Audio. Are you familiar with DIY already? The company DIY recording equipment.
Yeah, I think I've seen them. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty popular in
Yeah.
America. American-based company. Peterson Goodwin's the owner of that company. I've done some stuff with them, and they do collaborations with other DIY companies. So they sell products from other companies on their store to avoid all those taxes and tariffs that exist in like the EU and all those kind of things,
Interesting.
which is kind of cool. So yeah, so DIYRE is another really good resource. So micparts.com, DIYRE has microphones and their own preamps and stuff like that. And I've got to note them too. If you're beginning to start a project, they have things like mic boosters, like, an inline mic booster for
Sure.
things like an
Yeah.
SM7B. What else do they have? They have some really simple projects. A DI, like they have a transformer-based DI that's really interesting that you can build. Yeah, there's a lot of options out there in the DIY thing for starters, for beginners, where you can build something really simple. And DIYRE definitely have the best instructions because they have this online like part like identification thing and stuff they do, and it's really clever. Like, so they make it really, really easy for beginners to access
Cool.
their stuff as well. So yeah, they're probably two of the if you can competently build a cable, and your next step is to go, I want to build something on a circuit board on a PCB. They're the ones that I would definitely recommend.
Gotcha. Okay. So I gotta practice on my cables. That's what you're saying. That's the first place I gotta go is get my soldering skills back up, work on some cables, act like I'm a 20-year-old intern again, just in the back of the studio. Yeah.
Even just to practice getting like things right and getting
Yeah.
that technique down, it's not a bad option to grab a cable that needs a repair or
I've got a
have
few.
broken leads.
Yeah.
Yeah, start there and then
Yeah.
and then once you feel confident, you go, oh yeah, like I can do this.
What is your opinion on those like soldering practice boards that you can buy on Amazon? Have you ever seen these things?
Yeah. So there's
What?
like little kits and little practice things that you can
Yeah.
get to work on a PCB as well. Yeah. And some of them are just like hobbyist, like little circuits and stuff. Definitely. Like if you've done cables and you're still worried about purchasing a kit and worried about potentially damaging it or something like that, then definitely like get like a fun kind of kit or circuit thing or something to practice on for sure.
Okay.
But it's not that difficult. And a good circuit board is actually really easy to solder too. I find it in some ways doing an XLR or an instrument lead is actually trickier because you've got to get like the solder in the joins and
Yeah.
soldering to the points on a PCB is actually not that difficult once you
Yeah.
get the hang of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of remember that from the one little pedal that I built that like compared to getting it in the little thing with in the XLR lead, like that's like the trickiest bit is getting the solder in there, getting the gun on there, the right spot, the right temperature, and like making that clean. Like my solder joints were just never super clean. That was always my problem. Like there was always like, that bubbling, like, extra stuff left over like that. That's kind of the level I got to. So I feel like I need to kind of refine that technique. So if someone wants to learn how to solder, like from the basics, never even picked up the iron before, like what do I even do? I've got this spool of stuff and I've got this really hot thing. Like how does someone learn what to do with those things?
Okay, cool. What I'll do, I'll sort of show you some of the gear I've got here.
Cool.
I'll pull up my other camera and just show you some of the bits you might need. First up, you want to get a soldering iron that looks like this. So this is a thermostat controlled soldering iron. And then let me pull the camera out. There we go. Now you can see it.
Perfect.
So you need something with a thermostat so you can control the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the most important things. And then you need an iron like this one that has a really fine tip on it.
Okay.
Some people get their like soldering irons from their dad or their uncle or whoever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they make the mistake of trying to use these big fat tipped soldering irons or the kind of soldering irons that kind of that plug into a wall. Have you ever seen those that just plug? They're just a
straight in.
Yeah, straight in. Yeah. You don't want to use any of those. They're horrible.
Okay. Yeah.
So you need something that's temperature controlled. And then that way it'll keep the temperature consistent as you're soldering and it'll make the soldering work. You won't overheat anything and you won't underheat because if you're not getting the soldering smooth on the join, your soldering iron just might be too cold.
Okay.
It needs to be 340 to 350 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's like number one is two things: the fine tip on the soldering iron and a thermostat. And then the second one is having thin solder. And you want the right type of solder. So this is leaded solder, and people get a bit funny about using stuff with lead in it for good reason, right? Because it's toxic, it's dangerous. Just to, any of your viewers that might be worried about this sort of stuff, it's only toxic if you eat it. So you just don't eat it.
Right.
And then like you wash your hands after handling it, just to be safe kind of thing. But you want leaded solder. There is unleaded solder out in the marketplace, but it doesn't melt at the same temperature. You actually need a special soldering iron with special tips because they need to be at a much hotter temperature to melt properly. So leaded solder works better, like infinitely better. So just to ease anyone's concerned about the lead in it, just keep it away from kids and whatever. But it's safe as long as you're safe with it, like anything, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So leaded solder will make it melt easier. And then on that, if you're using the leaded solder, you want an exhaust fan to grab the fumes and
Gotcha.
that, and then just work in a open air environment where you can have like a window or something open and stuff like that. And then that way, like you're covering your bases with safety and don't have to worry about the fumes. People worry about just something. I don't know if anyone like you would recognize this from soldering as well. Is when you solder, you get these fumes that rise up. That's actually not lead. There's like a resin core in the solder. It's flux, right? We call it flux. And the flux resin is what actually evaporates and causes the smoke, you see? So people see the smoke and they're like, oh no, that's lead. That's going to get me, The lead itself isn't actually evaporating at that temperature. It's just melting straight into the thing. So there's all these kind of misconceptions about the dangers of leaded solder. You're not going to die from you'd have to be breathing in leaded solder like probably your whole life for
Right.
that to be a thing. Yeah. So it's actually pretty safe. You don't have to stress about that one too much,
Cool.
especially if you're only doing a couple of projects a year.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so they're the things, and that sort of I used to, when I used to teach, we used to teach a soldering course.
Hmm.
So later on, just for your viewers and stuff, later on I became a teacher for many years. I was teaching audio production and a bunch of other courses to do with sound and music technology and all that kind of stuff. And I used to actually teach soldering, and the place where I was teaching, they used lead-free solder, and they were wondering why all their soldering irons were just blowing up and burning out. And yeah, it's because you can't solder without this stuff. Anyway, unless you have proper irons. So yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah, so if you're coming unstuck and your solder isn't neat enough, it could be one of those things.
Okay.
The temperature just might not be high enough.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is just being patient and letting the solder melt to the joint.
Mm.
So if you hold the iron there long enough and just put the bit of solder on and just wait for it to all melt and join, it will come together. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. And then the other secret tip is when you do solder, what you want to do before you solder anything, like say when you're doing a lead, for instance, you want to actually pre-solder the lead and then the cups that the things are joining to. So on an XLR, right?
Mm-hmm.
The little cups where the lead will go into, you've got to put a bit of solder in there and
First,
then put a
yeah.
bit of solder on the connector at first as well. And then the trick before you ever join anything is you actually add a bit of solder to your tip. And so there's a blob of solder there before you do anything. And then that solder, because it's on the tip, will be warm and it'll melt everything together and make it join properly.
All right. That is a pro tip right there. That's what I'm looking for. That's great.
That's the secret, is just always have a bit of solder on your tip as you go to join stuff.
Okay.
And then
Interesting.
you'll never have a problem. And then once you get that and you get that perfect flow and that perfect connection on whatever you're joining, that's it. And once you see that, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Done.
Gotcha. So one thing I remember from when I used to do a little bit of this stuff, and I remember watching some YouTube videos, and too bad the DIY recording studio didn't exist 12 years ago. I might be further along in my journey, but I remember people online, like on forums and stuff, being like really over the top about cleaning the tip of the iron. So how important is it and how do you do it?
Cool. So what you do, like the way I think of it is like, when you do a recording session or a mix session and you control save, like you'll like command save or control save. It's kind of like that. Like whenever you think of it, you wipe your iron clean and then go for it. You have like a little sponge. There we go. Like a little sponge thing. And you just wipe that clean and then go again kind of thing. And it's kind of like if you're soldering a circuit board and there's lots and lots of joins, you can just like put a dollop of solder on your iron and just go like bang, 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 and get all the joins done in a row. And you don't have to keep wiping it clean every single join.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just to clarify that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, at all. Yeah, so it's not like you have to like, but if you're doing like an XLR connector, you do like the 3 joins and then maybe wipe it clean, put your iron in. And like anytime you're putting the iron back in its holder, you'd wipe it clean then and chuck it in.
Gotcha.
And then when you go to grab it, when you go to grab it again, you just wipe it clean and then go again. Fresh solder on the tip, solder away. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm kind of like, as you're talking through this, I'm kind of remembering the machinations of it all. And like, I'm excited to like jump back in and start practicing this. I got to go out in the garage and make sure that I have all the right gear to get myself started. Because I'm definitely like, this is making me super excited to dive back into this.
Definitely. It's such a cool skill to have. Like it's just being able to build your own things or repair your own things is an awesome feeling, Yeah. It's such a cool thing to be able to do.
So we've talked about the iron, we've talked about the basics, but are there any other bits of gear that you think are necessary or maybe even just nice to haves?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the simple, very cheap things that you might want to have is, I don't know what you guys call this, but we call it blue tack. You might call it like putty or
putty. Yeah.
It's just like in Australia, it's called blue tack. It's just like a putty kind of thing. This is like another pro tip Um, get some of this, a bunch of it, and you can use it to either hold your cables or very especially the connectors, like say like your instrument leads or XLR, not instrument connectors or the XLRs, because they're cylindrical, they'll roll around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You just plonk it in some of this putty, and then yeah, and then just stick it in there, and then it'll hold it still for you. So
Nice.
that's a really good cheap one.
That's
I
great.
always have I have a bunch of it just on my soldering bench all the time. Um, yeah, that's a really good one. If you want to spend a bit more money, you can get these. These are called I love the name of it. They're called a helping hand. And that's literally what they are. They've got like all these alligator clips, and you can hold your PCB in and solder your PCB that way. And then you can have like this little arm hold a bit of solder for you and stuff like that. And that can be really handy, but you don't have to have that. Like the blue tack, the plastic, the putty can be enough. I don't even use this much anymore because
Really
it can be fiddly, and I just use the putty a lot of the time. Even to put circuit boards on, I'll just put it on the putty and then just solder it away.
interesting.
It's quicker that way. Um, you very much need one of the things if you're doing any kind of stuff with cabling is cable strippers.
Mm.
And there's two types. All right. There's heaps of dodgy ones.
Yeah.
What you want to get, number one, if you're doing cables like XLRs or instrument cables, is these auto stripper ones, because you just put the cable in and you clamp it down and it'll strip the outer cable without damaging the interior cable. And then you can just strip away the other cable as well. So these are called auto strippers. They're pretty sick. And then I also have a pair of front-facing cable strippers.
Hmm.
So sometimes you get cables and things that you need to strip, and the auto strippers strip from the side, so they won't reach. Like sometimes you'll have a short piece of cable you need to get and just strip the end of it so you can solder it. So the front-facing ones come in handy for those. So, but definitely a pair of these for your first cable strippers. These are the best. They're so quick, so easy. They do a bunch of things as well, because they do crimping and stuff like that for terminals and stuff if you need that. So it's one of those things where if you get the right tools, this becomes really quick, really easy. The other thing you need is either a pair of needle nose pliers for your components and for cutting, and a pair of snips for cutting other cable types and stuff like that, or just cutting lengths can be, or component legs. You can see how much I've been sorted. These are actually getting worn out.
Yeah, I have a pair that I've been using to cut guitar strings for 20 years, and they're, dull as all get out.
Yeah, totally. And then the only other thing is maybe if you get into more sophisticated projects, a multimeter. Yeah. And then that's kind of really, and some screwdrivers.
Sure.
Just like a small set of screwdrivers is always important. And then one thing you'll need always is a desoldering pump. These are cheap. That'll help if you're doing cables in particular. These are really handy. If you have too many like big dollops of solder, you push the pump down, you put your soldering iron on, and then you just sucks the solder up.
Wow.
Sometimes they call them a solder sucker or a desoldering pump. Yeah. Everyone should at least get one of these cheaper ones. When you do PCB work, if you need to desolder something from a PCB, that can be a little bit trickier sometimes. And I've got a pump that is a soldering iron that then sucks up the solder as well for some of the stuff I do. Because I do repairs nowadays as well, and service of gear. I needed something that's a bit more full on. But they're a couple of $100 or so. So, but these are a couple of bucks.
Sweet.
Yeah, pretty affordable.
Cool.
And they'll get you started. Yeah.
Nice. So it's really not all that expensive of a hobby to get into. I think that's kind of another misconception that people have, myself included, is that like, oh, I'm going to have to spend all this money to get into building stuff. I should just go ahead and, spend the premium to buy the things that are already built kind of idea, but maybe that's a bit of a misconception that I have.
Totally. So the iron, a good quality soldering iron with the thermostat, like we talked about before, is the most expensive at about, maybe in Australia, you're probably looking at like 80 to $100. In the States, it might even be cheaper. Yeah, like that's the most expensive thing. But if you build like a guitar pedal or a microphone or something that's worth quite a lot of money, your first project pays for that, like
Right.
done, like easily. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
it's
that's
pretty.
great. That's a great like misconception I think to clear up for people about and me as well about this hobby is that the cost of entry is not so great. And it sounds like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for me, like I'm like, oh, I don't have the skills. Like it's the skill barrier to entry type of thing too. But from what you've been telling me, it kind of sounds like with just enough practice, maybe not even that much. It's not like impossible to learn with a spare few hours on the weekend type of deal.
Absolutely. As I said, like I used to teach students how to solder,
Hmm.
and yeah, the main thing is patience and just having a go at it and just taking your time. And then the prep. If you prep your cables correctly by tinning the things or having the right amount of solder on the tip of your iron, it'll all work. It's
Hmm.
just you just got to take your time, be patient, and then if you make a mistake, don't freak out because it's pretty much fixable. Like I've made heaps of mistakes.
Yeah.
I've made so many mistakes over the years. And like when you make like something a catastrophic mistake, and then you learn to fix it, you go, oh man, now I could fix all these other things. So it's kind of empowering as well. Yeah, like I'll say it now, like I've had some tricky circuit board work where I've lifted the traces and had to repair the traces and stuff like that. And then you start looking into how to repair that, and it's actually pretty doable. So yeah, you can do it.
Sweet.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah.
That's
So yeah, you don't have to freak out, and it doesn't have to be perfect your first time.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think everyone can solder. Like it's one of those skills that everyone potentially can do it, and they should. Like the thing that I always go back to is that when people started out as audio engineers, they were very much, in all senses of the word, an engineer. Like back in the day, if you were in audio, you had to know how to repair the equipment. Like we're going back to like, EMI and Abbey Road
Yeah.
Studios and all these guys wear lab coats and stuff, in those Beatles records and stuff,
Yeah, man.
you know, but they were engineers, they were scientists and engineers. And what's cool is if you get into that kind of embrace that like inner nerd and that inner science geek and be like get really into this stuff, there's so much you can learn about the inner workings of your gear, and like you'll in a much deeper way understand how your microphones work, how your guitar pedals work. And then if you get into building more complex gear like preamps, EQs, it really opens up this kind of headspace on like how that equipment works and why it sounds the way it does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that's like missing from a lot of engineers toolkit, playbook, whatever you want to call it these days, is that real deep understanding of like why an EQ does what it does, how it does what it does. Like, sure, like you can know how to throw the plug in on a track and move some settings around and make things sound good. Like, that's a good skill to have. Obviously, we all need that. But understanding, like, in terms of the hardware, how where that's coming from, like why it's doing the things that it's doing, like I do think that that deeper level of understanding can only make you a better engineer. And it is kind of like going back to your Abbey Road analogy, like it's almost like bringing back that kind of ethos from back in the day where Abbey Road and EMI, they had like a whole team of engineers that was just dedicated to like building new stuff, just like trying stuff out, like just to see what they could make, what they could improve. And I think kind of bringing a bit of that ethos back into our home studio lives can, like, make us all better engineers, get us better studios, and, just make better music. I mean, that's the goal at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, dude, 100%, like 100%. And like not obviously we're mentioning like the British side of things, but in America you also had Bill Putnam, who did the 610 Pre and the 1176 and all the API. And then later on you had the company like API doing like your famous API
Yeah.
preamps, EQs and all that, and compressors.
Yeah.
Like these companies developed things that had a sound, and
Yeah.
it's like they're famous and coveted still for a reason because they made these incredible sounding bits of gear. And yeah, it's a really like, if you want to understand why those bits of gear sound the way they do, like I can look at a circuit now and go, oh, that's this kind of circuit, or that's this kind of circuit, and kind of figure out what a manufacturer's kind of aiming for in the sonic characteristics of that piece of gear, which
Yeah.
is good. And then you're a more informed consumer too.
Of course, yeah. Like I said, I'm a beginner. I'm really excited with the tutelage of the master here to start my journey in gear building and DIY. But I want to show the folks what a master can do. So show us some of the stuff that you've done. I want to see like what all this years of experience looks like in a rack.
Okay. All right. Just to inform everyone, like one of the things you can build if you want to get into building like your first ever, like say you've done your first ever microphone, but say you've done a microphone or a guitar pedal or both, and you want to go into that next level of building mic preamps, EQs, compressors, 500 series is a really good way to get into that. And if people aren't familiar with the 500 series, it's the small little units that you put in a power rack. I'll show you. I don't know why I'm talking about it when I can just show you guys. Cool. So up top, we have the Neve 1073 preamp and 1073 EQs. They're from a company called DIYRE. They were the first things I ever built as a DIY preamp and EQ. They're incredible. Like I use them all the time. Off to the next couple of units, we've got the Cappy. Have you heard of Cappy before?
No.
Okay, so they're an American company based out of Nashville, and I'll tell you a bit about them in a minute. But that's their what they call the VP28, and I'll explain that in a second. And then the BT50 is the 550A EQ. So you can build those for much cheaper than what it costs to buy an API unit. They're like about $1,000 or so. To build a kit, you're probably looking at $300 to $400 per unit. So it's a lot cheaper. This is an SSL preamp over here. I've got another one that I've still got to build. They're from a German company? Yeah, German company called Link Audio Design. They do only SSL stuff. Very cool. So they do the SSL preamps, EQs, and the dynamic section. So you could build the whole channel of an SSL console, which is pretty wild.
That's sick.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And then below that, these are a 610, like the Bill Putnam 610 tube pre's. They're from Sound Sculptor as well. These are the OLA 5s from DIYRE, DIY Recording Equipment. They're actually discontinued, which is unfortunate, but they're an opto compressor.
Okay.
Yeah, so I built those. They're amazing. I love them. And then over here is the DIYRE 73P that they just released, which constantly sells out.
Sure.
It is the best Neve clone I've ever used.
Really?
Full stop. Yeah, like I've been lucky enough to work, as I said, in like a bunch of training facilities, teaching audio, and I've used real AMS Neves, and the modern ones that are a little bit different to the vintages. I've used the BAEs, if anyone's familiar with those, and Heritage Audios, and I've used almost any Neve clone you can think of. And that DIYRE is my favorite.
That's saying something, because there's a few choices when it comes to Neve clones. There are lots on the market.
Yeah, and look, it's one of those things where that unit, like, what I should mention as well, if you're ever not like, if you're wanting to get into this side of things but not ready to build, you can the companies themselves do build them for people at a much more affordable price as well. They're a much cheaper option. But if you can build this stuff yourself, man, you can save some money. Because like, it looks like I've got a lot of gear now, and it's taken time for me to buy a lot of this. Like nearly everything I just showed you, I bought with my own money. The only thing I've been sent is the 73P and one of the OLA 5s from companies before. Everything else I paid for out of my own money. When you're on YouTube, sometimes people think maybe you're shilling for companies and stuff,
Yeah.
but I've spent my hard-earned cash on these.
Yeah.
But the reason why I did it is because one, people are interested in it, obviously, but I want to build up my studio. I had the dream of building an analog studio,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And how that started literally was, and this is like, I'd already been building microphones and stuff for a while. So I was aware of the clone options in 500 series and rack units and stuff like that. And when I started teaching, I plugged a bass guitar into a Neve pre, and I was like, oh, this is a sound.
Yeah.
And like, because you would have heard this, everyone's heard this story, right? Everyone's heard this story. The story is like, you can either, or there's two. The first one is you just DI a bass. The sound of a bass DI'd is what you've heard on countless records.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we DI a bass and we go, why doesn't my bass sound like those records?
Right.
And it's because they don't tell you the DI they were using. They were using one of two. They were using either this DI, the 610, or the Neve 1073.
Yeah.
And those DIs don't sound like the DI or instrument input on your interface. They're a completely different circuit and a different thing.
Yeah.
I challenge anyone, go, like, if you ever get the chance to get your bass guitar or an instrument into one of these pre's, you'll hear it immediately. Like, you just go, oh, I've heard that sound on a record.
Yeah.
And once I did that, that was enough for me to go, I need to build some of this stuff. Yeah.
Mitch is dropping knowledge right now, guys. I hope everyone is taking notes right now, because he is dropping the truth on y'all right now.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things that there's a lot. I think we can all agree, right, that there's a lot of misconceptions in the audio industry, and there's a lot of things that are said. The other story is, oh, you can put a 57 on anything and it sounds great.
No, it doesn't.
And it's like, you put a 57 into a cheap interface, and it can, like, cheap interfaces are getting pretty good. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to crap on affordable gear. I'm all for affordable gear. But there is a sound when you plug a dynamic mic into a good preamp. There's a relationship between the microphone and the preamp electronically that happens that gives it this sound you've heard on records. And for me, it's not about is this thing better than the other thing? Like, is it better to have a Neve pre versus a cheap interface or this kind of thing? For me, it gets to the point where if I can just put the microphone up and it immediately has that sound, or plug the bass into that DI and it has that sound, that's less work that I have to do in mixing. And that's kind of where you start to realize the benefits of good analog gear and stuff.
Get it right at the source.
Exactly. Yeah.
Classic. Yeah. So what is do you have any big building projects in the works, or do you have like a dream project that you would just like, man, one of these days I would love to build XYZ?
Oh, too many.
Too many. Okay, fair.
So many of both. So I actually have I mentioned before, another SSL to build. So that SSL preamp actually comes with the SSL filters, and the filters on a real SSL console are the best filters. Like, forget digital fab filter EQs and stuff like this. The SSL filters on a real SSL console are the best filters ever made. They sound so transparent. Like, they're ridiculous. I don't know what it is about them, but I kind of do. It's the way they build them. But anyway, but they sound amazing. So I've got another one of those to build. And then I have a bunch of Cappy stuff. So I mentioned Cappy before, who are from America. The owner of that company is Jeff Steiger. And for those who don't know Cappy is so good at doing API clones that most people in the know buy Cappy over API.
Wow.
Just so everyone knows that. Yeah. They arguably, I'll say it, they build better versions of API than API do now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So just to give you an example of who uses Cappy, the producer for Jack White that owns Sputnik, Vance Powell. Yeah. So Vance Powell is all in on Cappy stuff. He's done a bunch of his Chris Stapleton records that he did.
Yeah.
All Cappy, all of the Jack White stuff goes through Cappy stuff on the way in. Yeah, he's a big proponent of that company, and so are a bunch of other people in the know. One of the tricks, one of the secret things of Nashville, if anyone wants to know, I'll show you those VP28s that I was talking about before, right? These ones here, what people do is they run their mix bus through them. So you have your mix, you export your mix and run it back through those preamps to add this saturation and this tightness and this mid forwardness and stuff to it. Yeah, and it's a bit of a secret sauce. So if you have what a lot of people don't know is that on the original SSL bus, right, on an SSL console, when you push the master fader up, there's a series of there's a transformer and op amp stage before it gets to the SSL bus compressor. So what actually happens is your signal all sums down into these transformers and op amps, right? So what you're trying to do is recreate that bus saturation that happens on a console. And that's why people do that. And it does a thing. Sounds cool.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Dude, you have given us so much knowledge, so many things to think about. Like I said, I'm pumped to get started building, and I'm gonna do what you said. I'm gonna start with some simple mic lead repairs because I got too many broken ones around the studio. I'm gonna get on with that, and then I'm gonna find a good, I think that's a good first place for me to start, because I don't want to mess with my guitars because they all sound good.
That's fair enough.
So I'm gonna find a good mic, and then I'm gonna see what I can do. I might be shooting you some emails or some photos, videos of my progress, just get some tips, or maybe just to critique how terrible my soldering is. But before we go, man, tell my viewers what you got coming up. I know you're working on some exciting stuff right now. I just want you to let my viewers know what you got in the works. I think it might be helpful for them because hopefully this has inspired other people to get into this awesome hobby.
Yeah, so I'm literally in the middle of finishing my course. By time, I'm not sure what your turnaround is, but by time this airs, I will have a soldering course for beginners on my website. So if anyone wants to go check that out, it'll be at the DIYrecordingstudio.com. So you just head to the DIYrecordingstudio.com, you'll find my course available there for beginner soldering, and it'll have all the stuff that I've talked about with a step-by-step video tutorial on the techniques, and I'll show people how to get those soldering joins the way I've explained. Because sometimes obviously I can talk about it, but seeing it in action is also a thing, which could help a lot of people. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, they can also hit me up there if they're wanting to, dive in and they're not sure where to start. My email is Mitch at the DIYrecordingstudio.com.
Cool. Sweet. Thank you, man. Thank you for that offer. I'll throw the links to everything that Mitch talked about in the description box below the like button. Again, Mitch, you've been so generous with your time today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all the knowledge you've given me, especially, not to be too selfish, but my viewers as well. I'm super pumped to get started with my gear building journey. I'm going to be documenting that, sharing it on my YouTube channel. So everybody that follows me right now, go follow Mitch. He puts out amazing content, all types of great stuff. Just a wonderful teacher and a wonderful person. Mitch, thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris, man. It's my pleasure.